Leaders of the world's most powerful countries meet in London to find a way out of the current global financial crisis, amidst divisions on how best to pull the world economy out of recession. Can they make significant progress and achieve practical results? What if the G20 summit fails? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Sahil Rahman. Stability, growth, jobs. With this, the G20 met in London on Thursday. To begin with, what is the G20 and how significant are they? And what do they aim to achieve? The G20 is made up of 19 of the world's largest national economies, plus the European Union. Together, it represents 85% of the world's economy and 2/3 of the world's population. It includes major industrial powers such as the US and Germany and emerging economic giants like Brazil, India and China. The aim of the summit, quite simply, to sort out the financial mess the world is in right now and help prevent any future crisis. Joining me are my guests in Nairobi, Ali Khan Sachu, an Africa expert and financial analyst. In Washington, VIJAYA Ramachandran, Senior Fellow at the Center for Global Development. And in Paris, Max KEISER, television broadcaster and financial analyst. Max, can I come to you first? The world's 20 richest nations gather to find a solution or a way out of this global recession. And of course, considering the problem began in the USA, I mean, is it a good idea that they should be the ones, you could say, leading the pack?
No, not at all. The U.S. is trying to impose a so-called solution by expanding their current policies, the current policies that created this problem to begin with. By empowering the IMF, for example, all they're doing is that they are expanding the powers of the Federal Reserve Bank on a global stage. And this will just cause more of a problem because the IMF will take on more debts and will enable the creation of even more debts. And this is, in fact, going to make the crisis much worse.
VIJAYA Ramachandran in Washington, would you agree with that perspective?
You know, I'm not sure that that might be the end result. I think the concern I have is that the expansion of resources for the IMF through the new assistance to borrow facility is going to go primarily to Eastern European countries that have large amounts of debt from Western European banks. And my concern is about the rest, particularly the poorest, the low-income countries. How are they going to be able to borrow? Are they going to be able to afford the kinds of resources that the IMF is offering? Under one version of the plan, I understand that the interest rates are market adjusted, and so this will be unaffordable to many countries in the low-income world.
Well, ahead of the G20 summit, the British Prime Minister Gordon Brown spoke about the changing dynamics of the global financial system and the importance of the emerging markets.
It's no longer the case that a few leaders can meet together to discuss the global economy. With over 60% of the world's economic growth in the past decade coming from emerging markets and developing economies, the old approach is no longer sufficient. And the success of emerging economies is the key to all our future prosperity. And that's why it's vital that a financial crisis does not destroy the prospects for emerging markets and the developing world.
Gordon Brown speaking there. Ali Khan Sachi, the aim of the conference had several objectives. I mean, if I just pull out three of them: coordinating and reviving the world's economies, preventing future catastrophes by fixing and learning from these experiences, and establishing a blueprint for global financial protection. I mean, can they reach agreements on these particular points, and is it really achievable?
As a trader, you'd always go long rhetoric and you'd short action around these sort of conferences. But Sahil, in this regard, I think they've actually come up with some kind of template for forward action. I think the IMF story, they are going to fund the IMF. The problem with the IMF is there's a history to the IMF when it was very much seen as the jackboot of capitalism, red in tooth and claw. Mahathir has experienced it, Mexico in '94. So this is, I think, the problem that we're trying to work our way through, that the IMF has this very powerful history, and people in the third world have long memories. But having said that, I think the proposals they've come up with are quite interesting. I think Gordon Brown is clutching at this conference. It represents his last political opportunity to try and get back into the game. But he's obviously done his homework and worked quite hard at it. And you can see they're coming up with some kind of trade package. The third world and the frontier markets are suffering considerably because they're being asphyxiated from credit and from the lack of credit, and this is one attempt to address that. It's late in the day, but I think they have made an attempt to deal with it. Obviously, there are huge differences. I mean, the Europeans are very much conservative and looking at sound money and the old Bundesbank tradition, and the US, the UK and Japan are in stimulus central. You know, that's the route they're going. But I think they've tried to bring something together here.
It's one of the issues that certainly does divide the Europeans, you might say, from the Americans. If I go back to VIJAYA and Max, on either side of the pond we call the Atlantic, VIJAYA, can a coordinated response be achieved when there are these divisions about how to move forward and about the bailouts that President Obama is pushing for along with Gordon Brown, and then the alternative is the French and German position?
You know, I think it's difficult to find a solution bringing those two sides together perfectly. But I agree with the previous speaker that I think there has been some gains at this summit. It's not entirely a waste of time, or, you know, I think it's important to acknowledge what has been achieved, that there is some common ground here on providing additional resources to the IMF, on some of the other things with regard to financial regulation, particularly with regard to offshore tax havens. There's also a proposal, I understand, in the communique around providing resources for trade finance. And there's some language around trying to prevent additional protectionism, which could be very damaging to the poor countries around the world. So from that perspective, I think that, you know, Gordon Brown and others are to be commended for the progress that they've made. There's no doubt that there are differences on the issue of the stimulus. But aside from those differences, I think there are a number of gains to be appreciated here.
Max, let me bring you in here because Dominic Strauss-Kahn, the managing director of the IMF, does say that the US is rightly insisting on stimulus and the EU rightly insisting on regulation, but they're not moving quickly enough in doing the cleanup of the financial system. Depending on your perspective and where you're sitting, both parties seem to be on a track to try and sort this out. But how do you analyse what they're trying to do?
Well, 2 points, getting back to what has been said by a previous guest. First of all, the IMF does have a horrible track record. And why should we trust the IMF this time? That's the definition of insanity, by expecting different results, going in and taking the same action. The IMF has a horrible history. They're a colonial force that has brought misery around the world. Second of all, a point was made earlier from another one of your guests about interest rates, that the interest rates are going to be allowed to be set by the market. We have to be careful about this. The interest rates are not going to be set by the market. Interest rates are not set by the market currently. The Federal Reserve Bank doesn't allow the market to set interest rates. They manipulate market interest rates. It's a command and control economy. It's market fundamentalism in America. This is exactly what the IMF, we can expect from the IMF, setting interest rates not per the market, but by fiat. And that's completely counterproductive to a free market. Now, as far as the question of European, France and Germany versus the U.S. model, France and Germany wants to bring in the hedge funds. They want to re-regulate the hedge funds. They want to shut down the market players that are extremists, the market extremists, and they're right to do so, and I think that should be a priority in this G20 conference. I know Gordon Brown doesn't think it's a big priority, but of course he wouldn't think it's a big priority because he's in bed with these hedge funds.
Well, we shall see how far this goes. Just going to pause for break there. And when we do come back here on Inside Story, can the G20 leaders convince the people of the world that tomorrow will be a better day? What if their measures fail? Do stay with us.